Welcome to San Diego Integral, July 9th, 2022. Our topic for today, the universe as a we space, presented by Professor Allan Combs. And now our host for today, Tom Habib.
So welcome to San Diego Integral. My name is Tom Habib, and I'm part of the leadership team. We have an exciting presentation today. Leslie Allan Combs, and the topic he's speaking on is the universe as we space. I bet you haven't thought about it that way. So we'll begin shortly, but I first want to mention a few housekeeping items. This meeting will be recorded. So the link will be available on meetup.com in about probably 4 or 5 days if you want to review the meeting again. We're considering down the road going to YouTube, but I don't think we have that ready yet. If you prefer not to be seen on video, you can turn the camera off, but we'd rather see you and connect with you. You can find all the events on our website about San Diego Integral, plus upcoming events. Roger Walsh is scheduled somewhere in the next few months in addition. And you can also see us on Meetup and Facebook. So join one of these groups so that you automatically get the announcements. If you have any questions or comment about the meetings, you're welcome to contact members of the leadership team, and you'll see it when you go on the website. Next month's meeting is second Saturday of the month, August 13th, and we're going to do a twist. It's humor and creativity. Humor and creativity by the comedian Alicia Datner. And from what I hear, it's going to be good. We're always open to small donations to purchase equipment and help cover other costs. You'll see a donation on the webpage. You can make it at sandiegointegral.org. So for question and answers, you can unmute your mic and speak at the right moment. Or if you feel more comfortable, raise your hand using the raise your hand button, which is on the lower right, I believe. If you're on a laptop, it's lower edge of your screen. If you're on a phone tablet, you need to touch the screen to activate the menu, and you can find it under More. So we'll also be checking the chat, so you can enter a question in the chat, and one of the hosts will reiterate it for you. Okay, so before we start, we'd like to welcome newcomers, people that have never been here before. So if possible, tell us your name, where you're hailing from, which city and state, and how you heard about San Diego Integral. So who among us is new? Make sure you unmute yourself.
Hi, we are Mike and Loa. We're from Vista, California.
Hey.
And we heard of you from the Meetup page, and it sounds pretty interesting.
You're right next door.
Yeah.
Welcome, Michael.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
I'm in Eureka, California,
Wow.
and am a friend and colleague of Leslie. He was on my dissertation committee, and we just finished working on a beautiful 6-week writing class together.
Yes, welcome.
20 years, yes. And San Diego is my hometown. I was born and raised in Ocean Beach, so it feels like coming home.
Welcome
Thanks for
aboard,
having
Ann.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Darcy, you look new.
I'm new. Leslie's my instructor at California Institute of Integral Study. Hey, how you doing? Yeah, hailing from Capitola, Santa Cruz area, and it's nice to be here. Thank you.
Welcome aboard, Zeke. Darcy, you want to unmute yourself?
Hey, sorry, just I'm on a new tablet, so I'm looking for. Yeah, hey, I'm Darcy. I'm from, I actually was in the Bay Area for a long time. I've gone to a lot of CIIS events over time. Now I'm back in SoCal in San Clemente for the time being, and just saw the event and it looked really interesting. I've definitely studied Ken Wilber like about 25 years ago, and I'm kind of getting back into that through other meetup groups. So yeah, this looked really fun. Thank you.
Welcome aboard. Anyone else? Stephen?
Yeah, hi, Stephen Casperite. I'm also a student of Leslie's at CIIS, and I'm up in Auburn, California, Northern California.
Welcome aboard. And I can't see page 2. Anyone new on page 2?
We haven't seen Jerry Fleck for a while. If Jerry's available to introduce himself, that'd be great.
Rebecca's waving her hand.
I am here, and thank you for recognizing me. It's been a few years, I think, since I've attended a meeting, but I was a regular for a while, and I saw the topic and it looked interesting, so I'm back.
Cool. Yay, Jerry.
Thank you.
Welcome aboard, Jerry. And somebody said Rebecca.
Hi, yes, I'm Rebecca Watford. I live in Pismo Beach. I'm originally from Etiwanda, part of Rancho Cucamonga. I've known Leslie for a long time. I finished my dissertation. He was my chair, and I think it was 2013. So anything I can see with Leslie, I'm ready to watch.
Thank you.
Always interesting.
Okay, is that everyone? I think so. So after the presentation at 6 o'clock Pacific Daylight Time, we'll have an informal social hour where you can raise questions, topics, and we'll get that going. So you're invited to stick around for that. That usually runs 30 to 60 minutes. And so as you know, today's topic is the universe as we space, exploring the future of personal and collective we space. So I want to read Allan's bio. Leslie Allan Combs is a CIIS professor of consciousness studies and is a longtime integral theorist and friend of Ken Wilber. His book, Consciousness Explained Better, subtitles Towards an Integral Understanding of the Multifaceted Nature of Consciousness. This is what Ken Wilber had to say about this book. The finest book on consciousness in modern time, bar none. It's a heck of an endorsement. He's also authored The Radiance of Being, subtitled Understanding the Grand Integral Vision, Living the Integral Life, as well as Synchronicity through the eyes of science, myth, and the Trickster. I love the coverage in that. As we said, he's a faculty member at California Institute of Integral Studies. He's founder of the Society of Consciousness Studies and the Four Rivers Institute. And we will be putting some of the links to the books in these places we mentioned in the chat. So without further ado, I give you Allan Combs.
Well, thank you very much. Yes, I've been involved in integral thinking and friend of Ken Wilber's for quite a few years. Although in recent years, I've been spending most of my time teaching, but still retain a really strong interest, and I'm honored to be here tonight. So I want to present some ideas and then have a discussion for about 15 minutes or so, and then some more ideas. So I have a PowerPoint here. I'm going to try sharing the screen, see if that works. So bear with me. Yeah. Okay, so you've probably seen this before. the 4 quadrants, of course, and all the zones that go with them. And so I want to talk a little bit about we space. We ordinarily think of we space as zone 3, that is for a group of people or a group of creatures, consciousnesses, if you will. But I want to review these just a little bit. These are the standard 4 quadrants, and the upper left quadrant is subjectivity, zone 1. That's sort of our immediate conscious experience from moment to moment, whereas zone 2 is when we are still in a subjective space, but we're kind of looking at ourselves or looking at what's going on in our own consciousness. This is pretty much what you do when you're meditating. If you have a mantra or you're just observing your own mind, you're in zone 2, and you're looking at zone 1 and getting comfortable with it. When we talk about we spaces, we're talking about more than one person. So you can be part of a community or part of a group and have a sense of we, a sense of shared subjectivity, if you will. And you can stand outside of that and have some sense of being with friends, being with a group of people that have a shared sense of consciousness or sense of subjectivity. So that's zone 4. In the right-hand quadrants, of course, zone 5, 6, and 7, and 8, these are objective aspects of the world. Actually, when we get down to Ken's theoretical model carefully, they're perceptions or ways of perceiving the world. But it's convenient to talk about them in the objective mode. It, the upper right-hand quadrant, single objects, and so on. And it's, that has to do with collections of objects or collections of things or collections of processes. Ken put systems theory down here, for example. Now, one of the interesting things I want to talk about a little bit is, to begin with, is when somehow the cosmos jumps the fence. That is, if you're on the left side, you're in the subjective world of yourself, of I, or looking at yourself subjectively, or self-reflection and so on, or we, having a sense of community, of being part of a community, or thinking about the community that you're part of, or observing it. And so these are all on the inside, they're subjective, and they're subjective perceptions, but occasionally things jump the fence, and when they jump the fence, you get phenomenon from what we do normally think of as the right quadrants, especially the lower right quadrant, popping over into the left side. And it gives you a sense of connection somehow, that you're connected to a larger cosmos, a larger system. So I'll talk more about this, and I'll get back to the we specifically as we go along, but right now I want to explore this sense of connection a little bit. The universe is a complex place, of course. Can you see that picture? This is a sort of chaos model of stuff going on in the universe, busy, busy place. And one of the interesting things about the cosmos as a whole is it's very well organized, or at least seems to be. Processes go on in a harmonic way, although sometimes they're chaotic, but even the chaos is harmonic in its own way. So there are patterns that appear. For example, the spiral pattern seems to be pretty common in the cosmos as a whole. So we see it popping up all over the place. In spiral galaxies, for example, our own galaxy, shells, lots of different aspects of the physical universe have this spiral or symmetric aspect. So I want to talk about this idea a little bit that the universe is self-organizing, that it's patterned, and it's complex, and complexity tends to emerge out of the processes of the cosmos over time. And some of them seep into our individual lives and in our group lives. So that's when the system kind of jumps the fence, as it were. Carl Jung often referred to this as synchronicity, things that are happening that make sense, that are patterned. And yet they're not part of the left-hand quadrants. They're part of the right-hand quadrants, and they kind of creep over the sacred scarab beetle, painted here by a friend and student of mine. She knew how much I was interested in synchronicity and painted me this beetle. It's a representative of the scarab beetle in the famous event in which Carl Jung was talking to a patient about a client, really about her dream. And she dreamed of such a beetle. And while she was talking about it, one pretty much flew in the window. It began tapping on the window. Jung opened the window and reached out, caught it. So the scarab beetle turns out, again, as a symbol of transformation, of something larger that's occurring. And so especially the Egyptian representations of it here that represent something sacred, something reaching into our own lives from some transcendent realm. So, and so is the praying mantis in some cultures. For example, in Africa, the praying mantis is like the scarab beetle. For example, hold on a second here. I wanted to mention that Joseph Campbell was writing an essay about the praying mantis when he was living on the 4th or 5th floor in an apartment in New York City, and a big praying mantis flew up and landed right on his windowsill. So these are times when the zones sort of spill over the right-hand quadrants, which are objective, perceiving the world objectively, into the left-hand quadrants in which we're experiencing meaning. There's really no meaning in the right-hand quadrants. It has to be provided by our own inner subjectivity, either individually or in groups. So meaningful events are only meaningful in so much as they enter the left-hand quadrants. But if you're coming in the right-hand quadrants, they're paradoxical because meaning doesn't normally occur in and of itself in the right-hand quadrants. So many of you are familiar with the fact that Carl Jung was fascinated by a relatively new theory and understanding of the atom. And he had this dear friend who was a patient and a colleague. I'm trying to remember his name when I'm a little bit dyslexic, and somebody can speak up and tell me his name because he's right there, physicist. And they work together on the concept of synchronicity. Yeah, I'm listening.
Bohm. David Bohm.
No, it's not Bohm. It's it's pre-Bohm, but that's a good one. This fellow had all kinds of synchronistic dreams and visions. He was quite an interesting character. His name will come to me. He and Jung both were, and he was an atomic physicist, as a matter of fact, and knew a lot about the atom. Carl Jung was interested in the atom as a sort of model for the psyche. As many of you know, Freud, of course, had taken the model of the steam engine, the idea of energy building up in under pressure and pushing the whole device forward. So his model of the psyche is built on this really 18th century energetic model. And the steam engine was the big machine in those days. So with Carl Jung, he was interested in the atom, and the atom has a nucleus which controls it. A lot of what goes on and has a great deal of energy. So this is a whole different notion of the psyche and what goes on in the psyche. The two of them came up with this model of how the universe works. There's ordinary space-time and causality at one end and synchronicity at the other. Synchronicity being what he also called the acausal principle. Here you see a kind of a combination of his vision of the atom with the energy in it in the psyche. This is from the famous Red Book that Jung wrote when he was quite young. He went into a period of retreat and did very deep exploration of his own psyche, and wrote the Red Book and did so many beautiful images in it as well. So this is an image of the psyche with the self in the middle, the self being an archetype or a powerful part of the psyche, not the ordinary use of the word self in psychology the way it's used today most of the time. So this is a model based on energy and the self or core, the personality being a source of energy and a source of direction. Yes, young Polly, thank you. It was Wolfgang Polly. My own note. Polly was a dear friend. Polly was quite a character in and of himself. He had rich dreams that were incredibly filled with synchronicities, lots of puns. He was famous for destroying laboratory equipment without meaning to. He was known for what was called the Polly effect. If he walked in the laboratory, things would break down. If you had a physics laboratory, spend a lot of time tuning your equipment, you don't want Polly there. In fact, there's a famous case where he was traveling through the city on a train, didn't even get off the train, and all the equipment broke down in one of the big labs. He had synchronicity crackling all around him. Now, he was a guy with a lot of internal problems. That's why he was in therapy. He had a lot of energy and frustrations built up in his own psyche. And he seemed to be popping out through these synchronicities all over the place. And Jung was fascinated with that. And again, developing this understanding of the psyche, with the core being the self. Again, not the self as you normally see it in psychological writing today mostly, but the core of the self, the core of the personality, the source of direction, really the source of destiny, the sense of what your life is about, where you're going to go with it. You never quite directly contact the self, but orbiting around it in a metaphorical sense, not literal sense, or all the archetypes. And these were like the electrons around orbiting, or in some sense, orbiting the center of an atom. They appear some places and then they disappear again. And so you have to do probabilistic calculations on them. They're not Newtonian. And so that's the same thing with the archetypes. You can have an archetype of the wizard, archetype of a wise old man, archetype of the Earth Mother, for example. And these archetypes can appear in dreams and disappear again. They can appear in many different forms. If you follow your dreams, you'll find these archetypes appearing and disappearing under different guises. For example, the Earth Mother can be a rabbit, can be a plowed field. It can be one of the sacred little terracotta bone statues from the Paleolithic. Can take on many forms. Anyway, get off on that, be a whole other topic. Numbers seem to have synchronicity seems to somehow have a lot to do with numbers and how they collect, license plates. I had a friend who was driving through LA and he was trying to decide through, it was years ago, he had two girlfriends, and one of the license plate in front of him said Jane, and then there was a number 4 and then letters U, Jane 4U. he said, "Oh, synchronicity. I'm supposed to go with Jane and not with Betty." So he did, and it was a catastrophe. You never want to take these things too seriously because, and other sources of synchronicity, of course, phone calls and all sorts of things like that. I should take that phone out because I've got two sons now in their 30s, and they wouldn't even know what to do with that thing. As a matter of fact, probably wouldn't know how to dial it. In fact, they can't even read an analog clock. That's how much the world has changed, I'll tell you. So I'll have to update for that. There's a guy who wrote a lot about synchronicity, and he wasn't much of a Jungian fan. I was a little disappointed in that. But Arthur Koestler was a brilliant writer from the World War II generation. He wrote a book called something like Darkness at Noon, his experience in the death camps. But he was fascinated with seemingly random events. And though he was not an enthusiast of Carl Jung's theory about synchronicity, he wrote 2 or 3 books about chance. One of them is called The Challenge of Chance. And one of the things that gets mentioned in this context is what's called the literary angel. Now, I don't know how many of you still go to libraries. Used to be we'd go to libraries to get books and go to bookstores and even drugstores. And it just seemed like sometimes you would just stumble onto what you need. Just find it. It would just fall out. But my first book that really sold very widely was the Synchronicity book, as a matter of fact. And it was the best selling book for the first year in the bookstore in Asheville, North Carolina, Malaprops bookstore. They had stacks of it up on top of the shelves up there, because they were sold very well. And a friend of a friend were talking somewhere in town about, one friend said, "Well, I've got this talk to give and I don't know quite how to do it." And the other one said, "Well, maybe you should get this book by Combs, Synchronicity, you might enjoy it." And the first one said, "That's a true story I'm telling you, really, at least the way it came to me." He said, "Well, I've got so many books and I'll get it if it falls on my head." So guess what? She was in the bookstore later that day and they were all piled up on top, and one of them practically fell on her head. She caught it in the air. It came down. Said, "Okay, I'm buying it. I'm buying it." The literary angel. So Koestler referred to the fact, and some of you are old enough to really remember going to libraries and stuff a lot. It's strange how often you can just stumble onto things you're interested in. And this goes for bookstores and magazine shops and stuff as well. It's a little harder on Google because the way the system works, but another aspect of synchronicity. Now, the thing is, the universe likes to play tricks on you. And these tricks seem perniciously purposeful. And there are emblems for these tricks. The crow represents a kind of what we might call a trickster, for example, in several cultures, North America, Central America. Actually, I live in South America. We don't have crows. Maybe the only country in the world doesn't have crows. We don't have crows, we have ravens. I haven't quite figured out what replaces them here. But in myth and tradition, the crow or the raven is very important, and also and often has a kind of power about it, a sort of sense of destiny, and also plays tricks on you. In Africa, there's a Nanza. A Nanza's a spider, and he'll mess with you. Pull little tricks, and there's stories of Anansi walking through a town with colors on one side that are different than colors on the other, so that people start arguing, and it causes great commotion about what color was Anansi and what was going on. Well, the idea is that Anansi is a trickster that creates what appears to be conflict, but actually stirs things up, so that there's a cleansing process that goes on. Some of you who are TV bugs may remember a couple of years ago a very nice series on, I don't know if it was on Netflix or where it was called, American Gods. Does anyone remember that? And these gods from different cultures would appear, not quite in their obvious form, but Anansa was one of the characters in that series, as was Zeus, as a matter of fact. He didn't look like Zeus, but Anansa the spider, the trickster. In Japan, we've got the monkey god, the trickster, and the hero as well. So there are lots of stories about the monkey god. And here he is in some of his different costumes. In Greek mythology, of course, Hermes, the trickster. Hermes was also the friendliest god to people, to men, as they said, women too. Hermes was friendly to human beings, was helpful. He not only was the messenger of the gods, but he brought good luck. He also was the what's called a psychopomp, which means at death, he would travel with the soul into the underworld. This is something that some shamans and spiritually trained people do as well. And there's traditions all around the world in this sort of thing, but something Hermes specialized in. There he is with his caduceus, the staff, which later was associated with healing as well. And I should say he's a fairly highly developed character, archetype. Hermes. He gets even more developed as Mercury in Roman times, but compared, for example, to Anansa here, not quite so sophisticated, not quite so multifaceted, although certainly plays an important role in the culture. In the US, there are lots of stories of Brer Rabbit. If you've read about these, there's Brer Rabbit and the Tar Baby. That's one of my favorite stories. You know how that goes. He talks to the Tar Baby won't answer him, and he gets more and more angry, and he starts to hit the Tar Baby, and he gets stuck in it. And there are situations like this we all run into. If you go fight it, you get stuck in it. You can't get yourself free. And Coyote was actually Fox in the old stories from the old U.S. South, was always after Brer Rabbit, and but Brer Rabbit would outsmart him. Here he is. He's caught Brer Rabbit. Brer Rabbit says, "Oh no, don't! Oh, whatever you do, don't throw me in the briar patch." And he throws him in the briar patch, and then he starts to laugh. Rabbit starts laughing. He says, "Well, I was born and raised in the briar patch, you damn fool." But Brer Rabbit was a trickster, and like Roadrunner and some other characters in the U.S., there's Coyote, definitely a trickster. There's even a book I have somewhere called Coyote Creates the World in the Southwest, and in New Mexico, Coyote is quite a character and pulls all sorts of tricks and does all kinds of things. Now, in Mexico, Coyote is more well developed as a trickster. So here he is as a dancer in costumes, and he represents a fully developed archetype in Latin America, at least through Mexico. I don't think we have him here in Ecuador, but these are images of him, Coyote, or the more developed Mexican version of Coyote. So all these things carry us to a realm that's partly in the left quadrant and partly in the right. Dreams are a little bit like that. So these are pictures from dreams, as the psyche wanders, and we experience the world in different ways. So we'll come back to that. Right now, I'd like to take a break. And I have some questions that I would like to go to breakout rooms and discuss. Let's see, where am I here? I can find you again.
I've got them for you, Alan.
I'm going to stop sharing. There we go. Yeah, you've got some questions. Now, this sounds a little bit off track, but it really is in the general direction we're going in. Do you have those questions?
Yeah, they're in the chat now.
Okay. Well, I'm going to be wanting to talk about and think about a little bit our subtle connections, our sense of we space, which I haven't really emphasized much yet, and how we are together in a more subjective, subtle way. And I'm going to start this, and then we'll have a different continuing discussions a little later. But the question is, and this is sort of just to warm things up, what non-human creatures have you felt emotionally near? Make a short list. Include pets and wild animals as well. So instead of starting out talking about human relationships, let's talk about our relationships with other creatures. We all have had pets, or we've had relationships with animals. So that's one question. And then following through, was the nearness a physical experience or a mental congruence? In other words, if you were very close to a dog, let's say, do you feel this in your body? Is this just a mental thing? Or is it just a mental thing? Is it a congruence of, the dog does stuff and it's kind of what you like and you get along? Or is there a real sense of connection? And to kind of follow up on that, have you experienced the death of a pet or other non-human animal? And did you continue to experience a connection afterward? So talk about those for 10 minutes, did I say?
Yes.
Yeah, and I'm going to take a quick break here too and refresh my coffee, and I'll be back.
Okay, and if you don't want to be in a breakout room, you'll stay in the main room. But get it started here.
Yeah, I'm going to stop my video and stuff for a minute and step out, but I'll be back.
Okay, welcome back. We should all be back now. Yeah, do you want to carry on? You're muted still?
Yeah, I had muted myself by mistake.
No, everybody gets muted coming out of the breakout rooms.
Reminded me of Garrison Keillor, God bless him. I won't go into that whole story, but he claimed that the first year or two he was on the radio, he was in a small room somewhere, and he later discovered it wasn't hooked up to the antenna. So I don't know if this is true or not. Sounds like Garrison Keillor. Well, let me see. I want to screen share again. Let me see. And I'll talk a little bit, and then we'll have discussion. And my talks aren't going to add up to anywhere near 2 hours, so there definitely will be time for discussion. So I'm going to share a screen, and I'm going to, that's the one we just did, isn't it? I don't do this every day, you probably can tell. Here we are. So we're back to the 4 quadrants. Everybody see that? And can you hear me?
Yes. Yes to both.
Okay, good. Well, just a reminder. I want to talk about connectivity and subjectivity a little bit. And as I go along, I'll continue to push for the idea that we have subjective or intersubjective connections that are not well recognized, even though I think we experience them all the time, frankly. We all have been sold a bill of goods about a kind of Newtonian universe. It's made up of separate particles everywhere. That was sort of the science that came out of the Enlightenment. Newton had to deal with gravity when objects exerting forces on each other at a distance, and it really kind of made him crazy. He kept trying to figure out because they really wanted to have little subtle hooks or something physical that would connect things together. So we come from this tradition that sees the universe is made up of objects. Let me see, I'm not doing very well in advancing my slides here, am I? Well, that button works. What? Okay, so I want to talk about the idea of interconnection. And one of the interesting little pieces of science, okay, well, I'll try this little button. I've got a little button, let's see if it works, is that most of you know that there's been a big project running for several years in which there are random number generators planted at places all around the world. Some of you know Dean Radin, the parapsychologist and previous engineer and physicist at IONS. He's officially retired, but he's still doing research. He's involved in this project. So these random number generators are all around the place, going away. And the idea is that since they're purely random, that if consciousness affects things, then they'll perform differently when consciousness forms into more coherent patterns. I've never really followed the logic on this really well. I'm not sure there is a real good logic, but the idea is basically that quantum events are pure random events at this level, and that they might be influenced by conscious experience. And when an event happens somewhere in the world that brings separate conscious fields into kind of a coherence, then it may affect the random patterns. And lo and behold, there's all sorts of research that suggests it does. It suggests that there's some kind of connection between people. Or maybe we'll say we're all part of the same system. It really isn't anything that is a theoretical model for, except that when things happen that affect a lot of people, they seem to affect us on a very subtle level that we're really not aware of. This is an old Freudian sort of picture of this conscious and subconscious mind, and I don't mean to belabor it that much, except that I think they're influencing, this is my own idea, but I'm not the only one, I don't suppose, that we do influence each other, and we are aware of each other's presence, often on a semi-conscious or unconscious level. You know, there's been a fair amount of research done on knowing when somebody's looking at you and looking over your shoulder, looking at you through the, I mean, people have even used video cameras for this, and people get a kind of spooky feeling when they're getting watched. It's not very reliable, but it's beyond chance. So my idea is that we do have subtle connections. We are a kind of a we space as human beings and animals as well. And most of this comes through unconsciously. Not that you couldn't be aware of it, not in the Freudian sense of the unconscious. We've just been trained out of paying attention to it. I think it'd be more like it. This is some of the data that's been pretty widely published, where these random number generators are going all over the world, and they don't really have any correlation until here comes 9/11. And then there you can see it. Right around the time of 9/11, there's a coherence that occurs that's pretty dramatic. And statistically, it's way, way, way beyond chance. And actually, I was in touch with Dean Radin the other day because I'm trying to sell him this idea that these things go on subjectively. And he doesn't really disagree, but he's a stat guy. And he sent me an article he's working on, actually not in press yet, but it's under review. Over the period of several years, a record has been kept of no less than 500 significant events. Now, I don't know quite how these are defined. If there's a major win at the baseball field, whether that counts or not, certainly something like 9/11 would have counted, although it's not in this particular study. But 500 what seem to be significant events going on all around the world, and then running these correlations. And you can see when you come right down to the time of the event, they peak out right there pretty dramatically. And the statistics that are run under this are very sophisticated. Won't even begin to try to repeat them. But the bottom line is this could happen about once in a billion years by chance. It's just dramatically powerful data to suggest that it doesn't really tell us that we're all telepathically connected or anything like that, but it does suggest that there's a coherence to human consciousness beyond the individual. There is a we space out there. And we see that it is real and it's having real effects on the cosmos. So without saying more about that, that's just sort of an introduction to kind of emphasize the idea that you really can go out and get the kind of data Dean Radin likes and run numbers on it. For me, I'm more of what you might call a phenomenologist. What do things feel like? Because I think when we're with pets that we're close to, crows that like us or dislike us, friends, lovers, there's a sense of togetherness that's palpable. And so that's the idea I want to talk about as a we space, as being a real we space. We are together, we feel it. It's stronger for some people than for others, and it's stronger. And some of the questions I asked for discussion, I think, are, I don't know the answers to. Or do we feel it in our body? Do we feel it in our mind? What about these studies of people who are being watched? Somebody's watching them, and there's some sense for that. Is that, where do you feel that? Do you feel that on the back of your neck? Do you feel it in your gut? Are people different? I think there's a lot of work could be done on that as a researcher. And in physics, of course, if we really get down to the nitty gritty, as they say, when atomic particles get together, even briefly, they form what's called a singlet state. Singlet, S-E-N-G-L-I-T-E, I think, singlet. In other words, for the briefest moment, instant in time, they effectively become one particle, and then they go about their business separately. And yet, their fates are now intertwined. Their properties are correlated. Doesn't make any difference how far one of them, as they say, can go to Alpha Centauri, and the other one can stay here. One can go to New York, and the other one stay in Paris. They are connected, and there's just increasing research about it. There's no question about it. In fact, I saw an article today of people in Europe doing this at a distance of 20 miles in Germany apart. I don't know what their method was, but once, my wife says this is a little bit like getting married. Once you're married, once you're together, you're a couple. And you never quite, if you live long enough, I think my connection with my first wife's gotten pretty weak now after 20, 30 years being separated, but there tends to be a lingering sense of connection. And some people feel these things much more than others. Of course, there are people who talk about soulmates. You may have sometime met someone and just instantly felt there was a connection. I've had that happen a number of times where I met people and just had a real sense that I already knew them, and they did too. It's rare, but when it happens, you really can feel it. So we see this at the atomic level, and you can actually measure it. That parts of the universe, in terms of atomic particles, get connected, and they stay connected. It's in particular ways, what they call spin on atomic particles. It's not like they're just chained together, but they're correlated. And so there's a sense of resonance, and resonance is like when several things are, or people are in tune. This is a very real phenomenon. You know, it's been noticed for years in Army barracks and dorms. You put a lot of women in the same dorm, or sorority house. You know, they tend to come into synchrony over time. Periods tend to come into synchrony. People synchronize. And that's a kind of resonance. It probably is triggered by hormones in the air. Pheromones, as they say, I'm not sure, but resonance is a very real phenomenon. And it draws in more and more other people. Parts of the brain come into resonance, and so on. We could talk a lot about resonance, but what I'm suggesting is that when you're with someone or you're part of the community, there's a kind of resonance that's set up there. I'm a big believer in subtle fields. Rupert Sheldrake's morphic fields, I think, are very real and direct a lot of things that go on that we don't really know how to measure. So there's this sense of connecting, and once things have been connected, they stay connected. Well, part of the paradox here is, of course, if the Big Bang's true, everything was connected at one point. In some sense, the whole universe is still wired together to some degree. But we certainly see it in personal relationships with each other, even with animals. And I'm suggesting that it's felt as well as thought. And as human beings, or any living creature, we're very complex. So I want to just talk about that briefly. Chaos theory often represents complex systems. Complex systems can combine and form hyper-complex systems. And so here we see a lot of small complex systems organizing into larger systems. Well, I think this happens socially as well. It happens in terms of we spaces, all kinds of we spaces. And so we get beautiful arrangements of complex energy and feeling patterns that are basically connected in this subtle way. Okay, well, I want to stop here and have another breakout, and then I'll come back and finish my talk fairly quickly. So I'm not used to really, to be quite honest, I'm not used to presenting for 2 hours. So it's going to be a bit shorter, but I'm quite interested to join the conversation after we get back together. So let's have breakout rooms again. And I have questions. I think you've seen them there.
Do you want to stop sharing, Allan?
Yes, thank you. Well, thank you for reminding me. I don't do this very often. There we go.
The questions are in the chat.
Yes. When do you feel strongest connections with other people? Friends, relatives, working together, sharing activities such as sports or games, romantic encounters. I didn't put the word sex here, but certainly it's a possibility. In fact, a friend of mine, Jenny Reid, wrote a wonderful book about transcendent sex. I have the title of it right in front of me, but her name is Jenny Wade. It's a book on transcendent sex. She used to come to conferences all the time and ask people who had transcendent experiences during sex, come talk to her. And I didn't think I had until I read her book and said, oh, I used to have these experiences all the time. I didn't didn't realize they were transcendent. One of the people she interviewed was particularly interesting. I thought would have these powerful transcendent experiences, and Jenny said, "Well, these are religious experiences, aren't they?" "Oh no, they're not. We didn't have them in church." So it was like, if God doesn't make a house, if God makes a house call, it doesn't happen. You know, to have a transcendent experience in church or something. But certainly sex is could be something here. Long-term relationships, what do they feel like? How do we feel? Surely you've had relationships with somebody sometime when you started a sentence and they finished it for you. So what's going on there? So I'm ready to go to break out. Hello.
Hey, welcome back. Yep.
Oh, here we are. So I had a little bit more to talk about. Shall I go ahead and do that, and then we'll have discussion, or how would you like to do things?
Well, I'm thinking, Alan, maybe while it's fresh on their minds, do you want any reflections on the breakouts or?
No, I think it'd be great right now. I mean, I've got a little bit more, couple more slides are basically philosophy. And yeah, I would love to hear more discussion. Our breakout room was really interesting, and I'd love to hear more. People talked about relationships with animals, for example, and that was more interesting than I expected it to be. I put that, really, well, I put that down as a question because, well, I thought I could relate to that. It kind of get our feet wet, and then we'll talk about relationships with people. But whoa, then we start talking about connections with animals, and sometimes what happens when somebody dies and there's an animal. Birds came, just all sorts of things, and I just thought it was really interesting.
Yeah, it was interesting that there was more of that mystical connection with the animals than with the people, and but that's certainly another aspect that wasn't in your questions about, to me it's like connecting at more of a spiritual level or divinity level or something like that. But like with the mystery in me connecting with the mystery in you in a different sort of way than we connect emotionally or anything like that.
Well, there's an ease of connections with animals, If you've got a dog or a parakeet or anything else, it's not very threatening to get close to them. Sometimes getting close to people can be a little anxiety producing, Put yourself on the line.
Or getting close to children. Children seem to have that ease.
Oh, sure.
With animals, you can do all that projecting onto them and they don't get upset.
That's true too. There was a wonderful little movie called The Parakeets of Something Hill in California, San Francisco. What was that? Beautiful little film about how close this person got to these parakeets that lived up on the hill there in the middle of the city. It'll come to me. But they just see. Oh, yes. Parakeets and Telegraph Hill. A lot of them, they just, they had been pets or in captivity somewhere, and they all ended up on Telegraph Hill. But what amazed me is his relationship to them, and the way they were behaving was exactly the way a dog or a cat might behave. And they seemed very needy of affection and being cared for. They just got very spookily human. Very touching little movie. Yeah.
We talked at the end about spirit animals and how we are all kindred spirits. And so the kin of four-leggeds works for us. And it's easier to get in touch literally with something in your spirit that softens you and leaves you open for the empathic realm. Every one of us kind of, like, oh, we've been told we're empaths, and how do you deal with that? Are you a transmitter? Are you a receiver? How do you set up boundaries? And so it was a lovely, lovely conversation. And so at the end, was it you, Michael, who said, thanks for bringing in my animal spirit. And here's Bima. Yeah.
Oh, neat.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, speaking of animal spirits, when my father was dying, my husband and I helped run the home hospice. And we had the whole family, all 13 of us gathered around, and a pure white dog appeared on the doorstep. Wow. And it just stayed there. We found out later it lived in the neighborhood. We'd never seen it. It stayed behind the fence. We found out later it had dug its way out from under the fence and just came and draped itself across the front doorstep. And so there we are, and we're dealing. My father, his breathing's changing, and he's just about to leave the body. And I have to say that there was a golden mist that was pure love in that room. We were all a little high, and with my guru and all that, yada yada.
Right.
But that dog, I mean, this is the physical part of the psychophysical. That dog, we had never seen it before. And the owner finally came over after about an hour. He'd been looking for his dog, and he was so apologetic. And oh, my dog, he dug his way out from under the fence. He's never done that before.
Wonderful.
I'm so sorry. He took the dog home and filled in the hole. And half an hour later, the dog came back, and he stayed there.
He was back.
He came back, and my husband's an MD, a retired MD. He said that was one of the best deaths he's ever seen, and he'd seen a lot. It was a very peaceful passing.
Believe it.
And I was in an altered state of mind because I was kind of helping run the home hospice, the physical thing. And as a house party, we've got the whole family, 13 people. There's a lot happening, so I was just kind of out of my mind anyway. And I just saw, oh yes, of course, it's the psychopomp. It was just like, well, of course, what else would it be? And so every time I would go in or out the front door, which I had to do a lot, I just kind of, do the namaste, bow. We are honored by your presence. Thank you. And then I'd step over and go do what I had to do and come back and bow. And pure white dog, about 60 pounds, I'd say. And we never saw the dog before or after. So I just kind of, okay, a spirit dog. So,
well, my father died in a hospice, and the last smile across his face was when our big Labrador retriever came up and poked his head over the bed. And my father looked and smiled and patted him, and I think that was probably the last thing he was conscious of.
Wow.
So something about these dogs. It's interesting you refer to it as a psychopomp too.
Well, I've read a whole lot of Jung, and it was just like, at that moment, it was just, well, of course, what else would it be? It was just, and then afterwards, I kind of thought, oh my goodness. But at the time, it was just business, just of course.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was talking about synchronicity in the first part of the thing tonight. How many synchronicities occur around the moment of death, before and after, and at that time? I had a neighbor a few years ago who died in his car. He went to the post office and delivered a letter, and then just got back in the car and dropped his body, as they say. But there he's sitting in the car, dead. His body is at the post office, and along comes this lady, happens to walk by, who's a trained Tibetan yogi of some kind, and she came and sat in the other seat and did some sort of a whole ceremony about leaving the body and everything else. It was just bang, she was just happened to be there at that moment. Darndest thing I ever heard. It's pretty amazing.
What a way to go.
Yeah, that's true too. Yeah. Well, interesting. So there were so many stories about animals. I guess I mentioned, I can't remember, maybe it was in my smaller group or not, that I've always had a connection with crows. And They're always nearby. And they're not here in Ecuador. I miss them. There are no crows in South America. It's the only country in the world that doesn't have crows, I guess. But I always had crows around me. When I started getting serious with who became my second wife, she was out driving with her mother one day, and there's so many crows buzzed her car, she had to pull off the road. She said, "They're your crows." But I always had one that would come in the morning and land on the fence and wait for us to put a few beans out or peanuts or something. And they're amazing birds. I always felt a connection with them. I miss them here in Ecuador. We just don't have them. And I thought, well, I have parrots, but there are parrots, but there are none around where I live. I live sort of in the middle of the city, and we don't have parrots here. We do have a lot of hummingbirds. Oh, somebody's got a picture.
Yeah, you might want to, everybody get this book in honor of all of your wonderful.
I love it.
Talent. It's called A Crow Doesn't Need a Shadow. And you can use that in the Jungian sense, or what. It's a guide to writing poetry from nature. And it's,
oh my.
Yeah. And when I got it, I was dealing with my dad's passing in hospice. I'll put the author's name in chat, but it's a reflection and a way for anybody who is doing the kinds of therapy and work that you all, wonderful work that you all do. Kind of a nice resource. Thank you for making the link to crows out.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
So Allan, when you were talking about synchronicity, I had the vision that synchronicity is a word we give to a subtle awareness where we don't understand the complexity in front of us. And it pops up seemingly random because we don't see the map.
I love that.
You do? I was going to ask you if you like that.
That's wise. I like what you're saying. Certainly true. We don't see the big picture. And that's one of the characteristics of a lot of synchronistic events is, wait a minute, this is part of something bigger. I wish I could see the whole thing. Yeah. But one thing's for sure, it's not random. I mean, in the random sense.
So Allan, it strikes me from some of the things you were saying that I've noticed that some synchronicities occur with no messaging at all. They just happen. And it sounds like from what you're experiencing that the messaging might actually not be such a good idea, that it could be the trickster coming in and putting something over the top of the experience.
Well, yeah, that's a good question. There are synchronicities that are powerful and facilitating and become important events in your life, but there are a lot of them that just, I consider it just sort of the lyricism of the cosmos. It's sort of the play of the universe. I don't know what else to say. I know if you get too serious about them, I remember a series of events that happened when I was living in Missouri years and years ago. I would go out and jog every day. And I kept finding these notes that said, your burial site is prepared. It was that kind of thing, one after another. And I mean, I could have got myself really worked up about that. I have no idea why or what, if there was any message to that. I never got anything out of it except that, somebody's goofing with me here or something. I don't know what. I think a lot of synchronicities are just, it's just sort of.
Well, I think maybe one of the things that happens with those, like what you were talking about earlier, well, let's start out by talking about connections with animals, because that's a little easier for people to relate.
Right.
I think sometimes we have these weird little synchronicities that maybe don't mean anything, and it's practice for us to become attuned to synchronicity so that when the bigger ones show up, we get it.
Yeah.
Well, that may well be. I think I agree. I would agree with you that there are many synchronistic like events that people just brush off.
That's right.
And, you know, the least you can do is appreciate it. Just enjoy, I mean, to me, just enjoy it. And, you know, some of the synchronistic events I've experienced have been dramatic. You know, it just sets you back in your seat, but not necessarily all that meaningful. I mean, like, was there really a message here? I didn't really get it. But there's something lyrical about the world.
Yeah.
In nature, you know, it's like God's playing games here, and maybe you could enjoy it with him.
Yeah. The sense I get is it's a message. The only message that I've seen is still here. Somebody or something is saying still here.
I wonder sometimes if language is sort of like the shadow of language takes you away from being able to really experience the synchronicities, and that's why, or to come aware of them, and that's why that in many ways it's felt so much stronger by so many people with animals, where the language isn't an obstacle. It doesn't get in the way.
Makes sense to me.
Alan, you know, I was thinking that too earlier, that maybe it's because the language filters out those wavelength of sensitivities.
Yeah.
It's pre-verbal.
So we have about 14 minutes left. Do you want to finish a little bit of the presentation? Because we can resume this chat in the social hour.
Well, I had a little bit more. I don't know that it quite is. Let me share my screen. We'll see where we're at. Okay. Oh, yeah. So the bottom line was that one of the ideas I really haven't presented very clearly is that I think we're moving in the direction of greater connection and more conscious, becoming more conscious of it. Not that it wasn't around before. I think there are a number of indigenous cultures that seem to have all sorts of connections and take it for granted. The Aboriginal Australians, for example, and other traditional cultures. But there seems to be an extent to which there's more of a sense of connection coming along. I don't know quite how to put it. There are groups now that really work towards a kind of powerful we space. Andrew Cohen, for example, I won't get into his background and all the issues around that, but one of the real interests he has and his previous followers have is forming groups of people that really have a we space that's very powerful, and doing problem solving together and having a sense of conscious connection. I have a background as a Quaker. I wasn't really raised as a Quaker, but I am a Quaker, I guess. And I've been to Quaker meetings, silent meetings, as you say. It's very rare, but once in a while, there's what's called a gathered meeting. Now, a traditional Quaker, Eastern Quaker meeting is to sit in silence for an hour in contemplative mood or space. Occasionally, somebody will speak up and be moved to say something, but most of the meetings aren't very busy with that. They're busy with silence. And at the end of a meeting, occasionally there's what's called a gathered meeting. You just feel that everyone in the room is part of the same conscious space. It's a very powerful we space. I don't have any interpretation for it. I don't know what causes it, but when it happens, everybody knows it. And it's a mystical experience, there's no doubt about it. In Eastern traditional Quakerism, there's an emphasis on sobriety in the better sense. And walking or being in the light of God, and that comes out of that. And it's Andrew Cohen's people. I just wrote a foreword for a book he's bringing out called Radical Spirituality, about his own trials and tribulations and growth. And one of the things that he's been and still very interested in is groups that can form these we spaces that are so powerful that you kind of lose yourself into them without really losing yourself. It's a paradoxical. And I think this kind of thing, I'm hearing more about it. I think this kind of thing is not as rare as it once was. So that's kind of one of the conclusions I have here. I don't have any way to prove it, not doing any research on it, but I hear about it, and seems very real to me. I've talked to Andrew about it at length. I'm not one of his devotees, as a matter of fact. I'm just a personal friend. But you all know a little bit about Andrew. He was a powerful sort of guru, and had some very bad experiences, and some of his followers had some very bad experiences. And Andrew went off to India, and he actually worked worked with dying people for quite a while there. I think he's still in India, but he's kind of pulled his life back together and tried to figure out what's going on. But he's a real deal. I mean, he had a lot of juice, as I call it. Talked to him a little while, and I remember a couple of times he and I got in a big conversation. I couldn't sleep for a couple of nights. It was like, I was so full of Shakti. He just laughed. But, there's something real in that. But his real interest is this creative mind space, as it were. I don't know what else to call it. And I've it's a little bit like musicians. One of my colleagues at CIIS is a jazz musician, and he loves to get in improvisational groups. And I'm not enough of a musician to play like that, but I know that when you're in a really good improvisational jazz group, there's some sense of being of a shared mind almost. So I think if we can manage to get through as a civilization without rubbing ourselves out, as you say, that I think there are a lot of clues that this sort of growth in consciousness is going on. And this group right here, those of us that are here, this is part of it. We're part of it. So let's hope we don't destroy the world in the meantime, and because it's paradoxical that at a time of such trouble and tribulation, trials and problems, that we're seeing such ascendance of consciousness in so many ways at the same time. And, well, that's pretty much my whole show. I like to talk about consciousness, and I like to talk about the fact that consciousness is really at the root of everything. And the best theoretical physicists pretty much will agree with me. There's Henri Bergson and what's his name? When I get really tired, my brain starts to fail. The great philosopher Alfred North Whitehead. They were both ideas that both they and many others said consciousness is at the bottom. It's what's at the bottom. And of course, Teilhard de Chardin, most of you are familiar with him. His whole idea was that we're moving, and William James too, but we'll skip him, that there's a movement towards what he called the omega point of all human consciousness, if not all consciousness, coming together. And now he saw this in a Christian context, although it wasn't fundamentalist or anything like that. He was a great theologian. But I think you can see this as a possibility that somehow we're all moving in this sort of transcendent direction and supporting each other, and groups such as this, those of us right here are part of what's going on. So that's pretty much my little presentation. So I will end it here, actually. I think we've been through the whole thing. Yeah. I'm going to stop sharing.
Thank you, Allan.
And yeah, and thank you. And I'll stick around and we'll talk a while or whatever.
Yeah. So I really want to thank Allan for showing up. We were under a scramble to get a speaker for July 9th. And I made the plea to about 8 people, and Allan responded that morning. And we all were able to breathe a sigh of relief.
You didn't tell me it was a 2-hour deal, by the way. I
was afraid you'd say no.
And then I look at it, holy shit, it's 2 hours long. I don't know, I can stay up for 2 hours. I'll tell you the truth, I'm just getting over COVID. And I'm almost 80 years old, and usually by 7 o'clock I just collapse. But you guys have so much energy, you've kept me going all this time. So thank you.
So it is fun being part of the emergent, as we gather and try to explore these ideas and articulate the map a bit. It is really fun. So are we going to put in the chat how people can get a hold of Allan?
Yeah, I've got his info here. Hold on.
Okay, great. And different things he's involved in, his books and whatnot.
So I gave a list of his books. So he's got a page on Amazon as an author. So I put that in there.
Great.
And then he's got some PDF books that are in the Four Rivers website.
Oh yeah,
And,
Four Rivers is a new institute. We're just getting going with it. So
cool.
For anything, any interest you have, we're let me just say we're starting to offer some courses online, and just finished one on writing. Probably will offer it again with Ann Kine, who's here somewhere. Workshop on quality writing, writing well, writing academic writing, writing trade book writing. So if any of you have a course you want to offer, you can talk to us about it. And of course, we're not accredited. It's just if you've got people that want to take a course with you, we've got the platform you can offer it on. So we'll just leave it at that.
All right. I wanted to mention our next month meeting. We have, Tom mentioned it earlier, but a little bit of a twist for us. We're going to have a comedian talking about the subversive and healing power of humor. And, we've seen some of that with the IAC. There was some playful sessions and stuff like that, and people tend to really get a lot of energy from that. So it'll be a little twist for us, but it'll be a lot of fun. So
I think this is a great idea. Let me just say I've been to a number of discussions where John Cleese shows up. You remember him?
Yes.
And he's interested in these kinds of things, and it's really interesting to hear him talk.
We'll put him on our list.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't be surprised if he'd show up.
So please register for the next event so we have an idea how many people are going to be coming. You can do it at any one of our websites. Anything else, Eloy?
No, I'll put the link to the next meeting in the chat right now. So, and then we can go on to the social part.
So we're going on the social.
If you all will forgive me, I'm going to go on because, as I said, I'm not very good after. It's a little later here. It's 2 hours later here than it is there.
Mm-hmm.
So I've really enjoyed your company, and keep in touch.
Quick, thanks Allan. Everybody that's got to leave now too.
Allan, what part of Ecuador are you in?
Cuenca.
Cuenca, okay.
The Athens of Ecuador. You want to come and visit? I've got a flat that's empty most of the time. Upstairs, you can We'll talk about it. Yeah.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Allan.
All right, everyone. Bye-bye.
All right. Good night,
Take
Allan.
care.
Namaste.
Bye, Jerry. Bye, everybody that has to leave now. And if you don't have to leave, hang around for some conversation.
So I'll get the conversation going tonight. I really like this presentation because it made us think a lot more broadly what's emerging. And I love this idea of a we space and the multiple areas that he tapped, whether it was animal energy or, you know, historical stuff. I like the random number generator, where when there's a major event, it doesn't produce random numbers. Why? Who knows? And I was going to mention to him, Darrell Bem at Cornell University, he was doing a study of, he would get people to rate whether the next picture they were going to see was erotic. And it was way beyond chance that they anticipated an erotic picture emerging. This was Darrell Bem. And then he switched it up. He got them to anticipate it. And he didn't show it until down the line. So it wasn't even immediately present. There wasn't a priming going on. And Darrell Bem had great credentials. And the American Psychological Association was going nuts because they couldn't explain what the heck he was measuring. So we often think when we read Wilber, we thought that the Renaissance and the advent of science disenchanted our world. Do you remember reading that? But maybe what's happening is science is coming online at the right time. And rather than to go to mythology, which previous subtle experiences were interpreted, a new religion was born, you know, a new cult was born. Maybe the confluence of science and these deep subtle experiences are going to articulate a whole new level of consciousness. So that's what I was thinking as he was presenting. And we were hitting that because we all have these, you know, unique experiences of the deep, subtle emerging, although we don't know exactly what it is. We've had experiences of a we space, and we don't know exactly what it is. One of the San Diego integrals, I forget who it was, but we couldn't talk, and we had to go outside in the yard and just point to things that were happening. And somebody pointed to these flowers looking at the sun. And it was like the flowers were going silently. The flowers were actually in interaction with the cosmos. So that's my thought in a summary of, I love Allan because he always brings up this thoughtful metaphysics that he loosely connects. Did anything strike people?
I can share a little bit. There's one question that sits with me, and it's a question that has come up all the time. I've been interested in this topic of synchronicity, which is what can we do to invite more synchronicity in our lives? What in our attitude towards the world and how we engage with the world and how we show up in the world can we do to invite more synchronicity? And I can share a couple of things that has guided me in this, where I've used kind of Wilber's model of the different levels. And one thing I've found is that areas of my life where the different levels of my being are in alignment, those are the areas where I often encounter the most synchronicity. And that's also where things tend to happen the most. But that also kind of works in reverse, that if I'm doing something and I seem to encounter a lot of synchronicity, then I can use it to feel into, oh, are things in alignment in me? So it kind of works the other way in reverse. And another thing, which was inspired by what you were sharing, Tom, was actually something I took inspiration of something you have said about relationships, which is the idea of conscious regression. And I've been trying to do that in my life with the stage of young children and magical thinking, which is to invite magical thinking back into my life, because I've kind of disowned that a bit. And to try to have this thread going when I go through the world, which is how would the little child interpret this? What is the magical interpretation of what is going on? And then kind of hold it together with the rational interpretation. So it's not the little guy or the little girl who's just driving the bus, but she's kind of looking out the window to see what's going on. So I'm curious to hear what other people's experiences are and how to engage with synchronicity.
Well, part of what I find at least is that for me, it took conscious intention to do that. I've taken a couple courses with Robert Moss, and he opened up dreaming for me, which I was never able to remember dreams and stuff like that worthwhile. But he was into leading sort of shamanic journeys, while you were awake, essentially, and lots of interesting stuff comes up. But, part of that, his injunction often is to, just pay attention, go out in the world and pay attention to what first, have maybe a question in your mind and see what comes up, what hits you first. License plate, signs of place, whatever the hell, So I suspect part of it is just learning to pay attention, having the intention, and then being able to attend to what's actually happening. And for me, at least, that has produced some results.
So I'm going to throw out the idea of AI synchronicity, because that stuff can be pretty darn good, right? Like all of a sudden something's put in front of me that I would have never looked for on my own, but somehow an algorithm knew that it would be of value to me or of interest to me. So that's kind of different than the idea of walking in a bookstore and having a book fall off the shelf, right?
Are you talking about things like the Facebook algorithm that puts up a news? Oh, okay, I see. All right.
Yeah, and while I got the mic, I'll just also mention that I love that he, in his questioning about relationships, that he put in a question about working together. And to me, like, it's a whole different world when you're working with somebody than when you're not. So you can have this, well, all kinds of things can change when you're working together. So anyway, I thought it was very valuable that he threw that in there. There wasn't much discussion in the breakout about that, but it seemed like a key thing to me.
Well, actually,
Benjamin?
was something. There was something coming up for me throughout the presentation. Is that we're in a living system, even though so often we think about it conceptually. But this is an actually living system that's alive. And Tom, when you did the flowers, we're in awe of the sun. It brought up for me the last 2 years of kind of descending shadow work. I can really feel that the material gross realm is fallen, it's evil, it's terrible. And as that dissipates, and I'm assuming that's just kind of a concretized, my Christian fundamentalist upbringing, you know, the concretization of that is actually lifting. And underneath it, I can just feel that everything is love. And I've had state experiences where, you know, I can feel that the lizard and the leaf that it's on love each other, and that there's this beautiful symbiotic relationship. So that's just a little sharing around the incredible living system that we're all getting to experience. And Tom, with the flowers that you mentioned, I'm getting a sense of that more and more often.
There's something that comes up from same when you were saying about the flowers, Tom, they were just like to the sun. A poem came up from, I'm not sure if it's okay if I share a poem here, but it's exactly how I felt when you were expressing that. It's from Gunilla Norris, and it's called Inviting Silence. So within each of us, there is a silence as vast as a universe. We are afraid of it and we long for it. When we experience that silence, we remember who we are, creatures of the stars, created from the cooling of this planet, created from dust and gas, and created from the elements, created from time and space, created from silence. In our present culture, silence is something like an endangered species, an endangered fundamental. The experience of silence is now so rare that we must cultivate it and treasure it. This is especially true for shared silence. Sharing silence is in fact a political act when we can stand aside from the usual and perceive the fundamental. Change begins to happen. Our lives align with deeper values, and the lives of others are touched and influenced. Silence brings us back to basics, to our senses, to ourselves. It locates us. Without that return, we can go so far away from our true natures that we end up, quite literally, beside ourselves. We live blindly and act thoughtlessly. We endanger the delicate balance which sustains our lives, our communities, and our planet. And each of us can make a difference. Politicians and visionaries will not return us to the sacredness of life. That will be done by ordinary men and women who together or alone can say, remember to breathe, remember to feel, remember to care. And let us do this for our children and ourselves and our children's children's. And let our practice for life's sake.
Please put the poem and the author in the chat. That was great, Anna.
Thanks, Tom, for mentioning that. That was like, wow, yes, please back.
Yeah, you brought the silence to the room there, Anna.
You know, the sacredness of that poem and the call to how things are going to get resolved. I felt Allan say this is, you know, this is part of the emergence in what we do. And, you know, I always have this sense we're on the threshold of just beginning to understand. That's why I asked them, is synchronicity a word that we use because we don't recognize the complexity of the pattern? Because there's so much more. There's so many people working in their areas to draw the map. And it is sacred work. Is when we're aware of what we're doing and we fight through some of the noise, you know, the hum, and we stay focused and we bring it to light wherever we can, whenever we can, then we're contributing to the evolution. So that poem, Silence, blew me out because it's exactly right.
So maybe some future topic on connection with the sacred would be a welcome thing. Like, I don't know who that would be. I've been reading David Abrams' Spell of the Sensuous, but I think he's passed. So, but it's just there's so many just beautiful things about. Like he did a whole thing on wind and really about breath and wind and stuff, but how our words are wind, and how it was different before we had an alphabet than after, and how the first alphabets didn't have vowels and later. Anyway, all that whole, and like some of the stuff Alan brought up today with the relationship with the animals and the sacredness in other relationships. So anyway, that's something I would be interested in more of.
I noticed that Darlene wrote, "Enjoy the silence." Was that a quote or an invitation for right now? Who's Darlene? Oh, there you are.
She stepped away. Here she is.
Oh.
So Darlene, Tom was asking about the quote you put in there.
Yeah, was that an invitation for the moment?
I was referring to the that song, "Enjoy the Silence." But it's not,
Very good.
it's a little different though. that Britain band from the 90s.
So this whole theme of the cosmos as a we space was that was beautiful. That was like, it's hard to even like take it all in. Still, it's like I heard it all, but it's still percolating and still. Still trying to feel into it. Bye, Omar.
I'm curious how people are feeling now, because I feel a little bit like that lizard on the leaf, just enjoying the time with you.
Hey, everybody. I wanted to share that I just yesterday, I watched all of the May and June meetings, including the hour afterwards with the commentary. So I feel like I just spent like an hour talking with all of you, or a whole day, I mean, or two spent with all of you, getting to know you and hearing your insights. And I just wanted to say it was nice to connect in person. Sometimes I'm busy on Saturdays or I'm too anxious to speak up, but working on it. Thank you.
Well, thank you. That's great. It's good to know somebody's watching this.
Yeah. Oh, actually, now that I mention it, I wondered if, because different speakers mentioned that they are putting links in the chat, but there's no access to what was in the chat afterward when you watch.
We have that. We have that. We can put that in there.
Just, I remember like Tom had the link for the a test for the HSP. Yeah. I wanted to thank you so much for that presentation. It was very meaningful for me personally. I'm glad I was not in person for that, because when you gave your examples of, I mean, one of your examples name was Julie, if I, like how obvious was that? But I had to like really emotionally let go, or experience, because I related to those, but like both of those examples. So I want to hear more what you had to share. So looking forward to that.
Did you get the link for the HSP questionnaire?
No, I feel like I've done some before, but I'm not familiar with what your specific link was. Unless
I'll put it in the chat right now.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Thanks. That was valuable feedback, Julie.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Well, what do you think, Tom? A good time to close out, or?
Let's hang around another minute. Okay, here's a link. Oops.
Yeah, the trick is on the links is how to share it with YouTube, but we'll figure something out. We can just put it in the comments in the YouTube video. A little bit more work.
Okay. It's loading.
It's amazing how all this stuff is beginning to synchronize. Because like I'm getting ready to speak in Sedona when they do their seminar. Sedona Integral is doing a seminar online, or you can go to Sedona. And Larry was helping me work on this. And I'm asking the question, are highly sensitive people nature's emergence of what we need in order to relate to each other? And do they know it? And are they ready? Which Larry and I were saying is a big no on both accounts. They don't know and they're not ready. Because what you were saying, Julie, that fire hose of, and who was raising the issue of 35 senses, not just the 5?
Right.
But that fire hose of senses that HSPs seem to not have good control over, whereas could be a gift. But I'm asking that question, is it an evolutionary emergence? Because it's 20% of the population. If these people can stay centered and use that energy, I mean, the changes they can make can be enormous. Because most of us have to work our ass off to feel the embodiment. They have it in spades. They can't turn it off. So I don't know. I'm speculating like Alan is.
I think it's a good speculation, especially that you're framing highly sensitive persons as a construct, a category, whatever, in a positive way as a gift. That brings huge value, I think, for any HSP, and how to relook at themselves and realize that, you know, the intensity, not only the volume, but the quantity of situations they might be in, and just be feeling all kinds of things. I think it's very valuable in, again, just helping, because I'm an HSP, and helping me personally look at, it helps me reframe myself in those situations and how to be with them and how to get clear, at least work on getting clear about, well, how much of what I'm feeling is the situation, the other people, the whatever, and how much of it is me. Because to Alan's point in this presentation, that we're connected and we're going to feel people's stuff depending on how open we are, how present we are. That's not good or bad, it's just the way it is. And yeah, so I like what you're doing, you know, speculation or not, Tom. I mean, go for it. Yeah.
Yeah, I like the direction that your inquiries are headed. I think, yeah, I mean, learning about HSP helps to sort of reframe your weaknesses, your perceived weaknesses as maybe superpowers in a sense, or at least strengths, and knowing that, yeah, most of society doesn't see them as that. So it's an uphill battle to see that value yourself, and then to figure out what to do about it and like how to manage it on a day-to-day basis is another thing.
That's big.
Yeah, but I think that people don't know it, but when they do, it unleashes something. And then there's the work of the readiness, I guess. It's well, that's an ongoing process. Yeah, thank you.
My daughter's HSP and just got licensed as a psychologist. And it's funny, a couple of years ago, while she was doing her postdoc up in Berkeley, she called me and told me, Dad, I threw away my schedule, last year's schedule, and I felt bad for it. How HSP is that? What I liked about it is she was ahead of the curve. You know, rather than actually grieve it. When she was a young kid, she grieved us throwing a toilet seat away. So you can see it's a lot. And some of you aware of the study I ran among the integralists, people involved in integral theory, they are more HSP. You know, this is on a continuum. It's not like pregnancy, discrete. You're either pregnant or you're not. Even if you're not at the cutoff point, if you're high on that score, you got a lot of sensation and awareness to be able to turn down the center. So it serves you, it doesn't run you. So, you know, working with a lot of people with this, it's been a challenge. I was telling Larry, there's one woman, she's been in therapy on and off for 6 years. And she's finally on top of it, you know, where people come into her store and she just like invites them into this place. And they just go, God, I really like being with you today. They have no idea what hit them. Whereas before, she used to be this jittery, anxious, you know, you'd meet her and feel like she was almost paranoid. So think, and to drug these people. I mean, sometimes the drugs help, but it seems profane, you know, not to help them utilize it. So.
So the trick is kind of taking them from being the canary in the coal mine, where they're just the first to feel the damage or whatever, to feel the pain, to where I don't know, it could be more of a spotlight for us, or a lamp or something to show the way or something.
Oh, I got to borrow that, Eloy. I love that. Canary in the coal mine. Wow. Is this a good place for us to stop, or do people want to stay together?
May I add something? Oh.
Sure.
Oh, can you hear me? Sorry. Still getting used to this whole Zoom space thing. I had a spiritual mentor once describe, and by the way, I think I came across HS, the original stuff in like the 90s or the early noughts. And I was like, yeah, that's me for sure. And have, well, anyway, I had a spiritual mentor a couple of years ago say something to the effect when I was describing almost like the feeling of like blowing out circuits, especially when taking in all the events of the world. And this was pre-COVID, by the way, like this was just reading the news and understanding I needed to kind of titrate myself down off of the information overload. And he's like, well, it's like your nervous system is directly tapped into the universal unconsciousness, and all of that shit's coming into your body and blowing out your fuses. And like, he was the first person to not make me wrong, to not make me too sensitive. I've definitely had various people, friends, family, and practitioners say something to the extent of, well, you know, the concept of mirror neurons, like you got to stop with the empathy. Sympathy's good. And I had always been trained that like empathy is better than sympathy. But he's like, you know, as a self-preservation tactic to avoid continually blowing oneself out, I mean, to use a machine metaphor, I don't think it's that accurate. But and I also wanted to say that the stuff around, I think the interesting thing for me is I've been invited by spiritual practitioners and mentors to start looking at it. I think I've looked at it from a trauma-informed perspective of what has happened to the minds of like extrasensory people who perceive on so many more subtle levels, maybe even autism. Like I've definitely had sound things come up where I can hear things that people have bragged about training themselves. I had an ethnomusicologist and sound engineer. We were sitting in a restaurant and he went to the restroom, and I commented to my friend like, oh God, those lights, the hum is like, so it's almost like, can we maybe go outside? And he came back and he's like, you hear that? I trained myself to do that. I trained myself to perceive those. And my friend and I kind of just knowingly looked at each other and kind of winked, like some of us can't turn it off. But it was interesting because it was the first time I thought, what is wrong with me? And then this guy was literally like kind of super proud of himself for having developed this capacity to perceive things that I couldn't shut off. So it's just, context is a very interesting thing. And then like back to the spiritual invitation of, well, okay, maybe people developed because there was too much cortisol in the womb, or maybe we're exposed to things and it changed our brains and it made us more sensitive, and it's all trauma, trauma, trauma. But like what if there was a way to be more grounded spiritually that would help with the actual somatic experience of like how hard it is, how, or maybe to even reframe that, had the challenges of so much perception that is it just makes it almost impossible to function sometimes without like cocooning oneself for a few hours, just to kind of recalibrate and reset one's nervous system to be able to like literally just function. I'm just, oh, and then the one more thing, I know in our breakout group, I did mention Stephen Porges, the polyvagal theory, and that his idea of, you know, neuroception, that even babies, it's like a sense of being able to perceive whether one is safe or not is really what that whole concept is about. But the polyvagal theory is like hotly debated. It's a paradigm shift, and obviously it's not mainstream yet, but I think it's in certain circles, it's gotten more appreciation because he talks about these states of fight, flight, fawn, freeze, and there's one more I can't remember, but it's so useful because it's like for once somebody's actually talking about stuff that many people, it's there. It's like, it's not like we have to like strain to feel it. It's like, it's there all the time, and suddenly somebody's naming it, and it's so heartening to finally feel like, oh my God, I'm not crazy. And also like, yeah, very traumatized animals and children often have a way of like instantaneously trusting. And I have worked a lot in educational and therapeutic settings, but it's just an interesting thing. Like, okay, like, I don't know if it's a healing angle, if we're meant to, what the meaning is. Like you're talking about sort of like evolving our culture forward or our shared humanity. I'm not sure, but it does seem to have to do with safety. But then I'm interested in the next step, which is what a lot of Buddhists get into, which is beyond safety. When the bombs are blowing up around you and Mother Teresa's holding a child and gazing and attuning to that child, you know, and doing what many would call a heart-centered connection. Like, despite all the madness going on, how does, like, is safety really the thing? So I'm looking at, I just looked at my image. I'm getting flushed at just talking to everyone. So thank you for your patience. But I just have questions about, you know, how people have grounded to be able to live in you know, oh, I see, engaged Buddhism. Yeah. So it's like we need to survive in this world on a physical level, and we're in late stage capitalism, depending on your belief system. But it's a pretty harsh world out there. It's pretty competitive. It's not very safe for the majority of people on Earth. And so what's a possible gift that the HSP can perceive and, I don't know, widen like the little tendrils of possibility and hope in creating something new? I don't know. So, I'm casting a net and hoping
real quick.
Fun.
One of the things I teach people at HSP is, say if you're talking to your girlfriend and she tells you that she just learned her husband's cheating on her. She's having a first-person experience full of feeling, insecurity, emotion. You're having a second-person experience, and you're right in the jet blast of a lot of pain. We have a choice. We don't have to stay as second. We can go to third person, stand aside. We know what's going on, but just that standing aside is the same thing of, if I want to experience a waterfall, I can stand under it and it's going to beat me into the rock. Or I can stand right next to it and get enough sound, mist. I'm getting plenty of connection. So that awareness of when to go to third person. So the third person, the way I like O'Fallon describing it, it's kind of like if two people are having that discussion about her husband cheating, and you're watching them have a discussion, you're getting enough information without wearing your ass out, so that you need that alone time to recover. So that becomes very, very valuable. And that stuff has a lot to do with Buddhist teaching. I mean, they've been teaching this stuff for thousands of years. Is that useful?
Yes, I was actually going to say this reminds me of what I've learned about meditation, which is to notice who's noticing the observer, the noticer. Is that what you're talking about with Buddhism?
Yeah, just standing back at times, not feeling everything so deeply, not feeling the toilet seat, not feeling the appointment calendar. One of my clients, she drove over a dead bird in the road and she's crying. What are you doing? You can't feel everything. That's a very undisciplined way of being in the world. It's self-abuse to do that.
Well, I have to disagree with that one, Tom.
Okay, jump.
Because I think it's important to feel whatever's happening. It's the thinking about what about the feeling that gets us in trouble, not the actual. So feeling sorrow about a dead bird is not a problem. It usually is transitory. You see the dead bird, you feel bad for a while. It's when you start thinking, oh, you know, birds are dying everywhere, and that then it becomes a problem. So I you know, when you, I don't know, like, I think we push down too many feelings.
Well, I thought when Tom was talking about that, I thought he meant that if you're behind the wheel of a car and you're getting all emotional, you may be endangering yourself and others. Maybe I misunderstood.
Funny, I heard Terry Patton in your answer, Eloy, because I once talked about this in front of him, and his response was, I don't know that we have to armor ourselves to be in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of like that. And I'm certainly not advocating living in denial or repression. And what I'm talking about is the HSP people that are way over feeling too much.
Okay.
And then the consequence is they need a lot of time alone to recover. Whereas when we're mindful of, what do I choose to connect with? I'm not going to watch a ton of CNN. It just depresses me. I'm going to watch some until I turn dark. And then I'm going to titrate it.
I've often heard the idea for self-regulation, of the idea that even school children are learning this idea that like feelings, it's like clouds in the sky, and it's like it comes through, and to just let them pass, because I think it's especially for people who aren't exposed to these ideas and just think I'm going crazy, there can be this dive into dissociation really quickly for HSPs, I believe, and for many other people who've maybe also had trauma in their own personal development along with that propensity to be so sensitive. And it is like I'm really excited actually about a lot of programs in schools where children are learning like, yeah, I feel this way, and then it's just like a passing storm, and I'm still me inside, and it's just something I'm getting wet from the rain cloud, but I'll dry off and the sun will eventually return. Or I love this idea, but learning this stuff as an adult, it's can be very challenging. And like, yeah, Eloy, I think you're saying like, it's easy to make up stories about things. Oh, and you're writing something right now about polyvagal. Let me just start clicking into comments. Thank you.
I just wanted to tag in what she said. I mentioned that I feel very strongly that nervous system regulation should be taught in schools. It's like as part of a health class kind of a thing. And that is a good place to start from. Rather, like I in previous meetings I heard you discussing if you should teach levels or quadrants even, and maybe that's too much. I remember Larry, what you were saying is that no. Yeah, I'm agreeing with you. So thank you.
Thank you, Keith, staying up so late.
Good night. Good night,
Okay.
all.
Keith
Love
and
everybody in
Rasmus.
Hungary.
I look
Keith and
forward to the
Rasmus are-
next one. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Good night, everybody.
Night. Yeah, was it like 2 a.m. there, Rasmus?
Yeah, it's pretty late.
It's getting close to 4 a.m.
Oh,
Yeah.
geez, okay.
We're in the same time zone, close to 4. Yeah, well, for me, it's summer vacation, so I can burn the candle at both ends. We'll see you next time.
Okay,
Take care,
thank you.
Keith. All right. I gotta run because my daughter's here visiting.
Dinner's on the table. Are you kidding?
Dinner's getting on the table too. So love to everyone. Good seeing everybody here. See you
Yeah,
next month.
See you next month, and we'll have some laughs next month.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye. Bye all.
For further information, including upcoming events, resources, links to our Facebook and Meetup pages, and our fabulous donate button, please visit our website at sandiegointegral.org. Donations are greatly appreciated and help us to continue to provide information and connection within the Integral community.